Salutations, everybody. Welcome back to Victoria 3. I'm Lord Forwind, and today we are here with a country guide that has been heavily requested already. Japan, the Japanese Shogunate. How to play Japan. So this video should probably be divided into several categories. I'll try and chapter them below. You can use them. If you did enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe. I have a Discord. Check that out. Links on the YouTube homepage as well as the description. And hopefully this will help you play Japan. So let's talk about the Japanese starting situation. So the Japanese are in an interesting position. They are both simultaneously very weak as well as simultaneously one of the medium to stronger nations in the game, and with the potential to become a great power historically like they did and be one of the major players in World War II, despite not being the world's largest World War I participant, even though they got stuff out of World War I. So let's talk about how to get there and where they are to start. They are an unrecognized major power. In order to become recognized, they have to win a diplomatic play against a great nation, forcing recognition. Just throwing this out here because it's something a lot of people forget. You have to do a force recognition play. If you can get them to back down, you win immediately. Otherwise, you have to win a war, which usually involves invading their lands and beating them in battle. They don't tend to invade you because you're the aggressor. Okay. Other things to point out about Japan. Japan is heavily populated. It's one of the larger populated nations in the game, with 6th in the world. They will quickly fall behind some of these other nations that have better healthcare systems, as well as growth, as well as migration. Japan, on the other hand, is about as far removed from immigration as you can get. You have closed borders, you have national supremacy, you have people who even want to become an ethno-state. You are totally isolated, there we go, from everyone else. You can't declare maximum interest. You have tons of authority. Technology spreads. You have no trade routes. On the other hand, you can tax more people. Great. Doesn't help you. Now, this is not to be said that this isn't a useful trade policy, but the other ones that allow you to trade for resources you need are much better. So one of the tricks for Japan is to get away from this, and we'll talk about that. You also have peasant levies. Thankfully, everybody in your country at the start wants you to change to a professional army or a national militia. I would say go professional army. Getting rid of peasant levies weakens the shogunate, which is good, as well as increases the samurai's armed forces, and in general just makes your nation that much better. The shogunate is honestly a bit of a problem for Japan. Not to say it's a bad government or didn't do a good job. It's just the way the game is set up now. It's not so great. The devs have already talked about changing it so that the more authoritarian and isolated culturally and religiously your nation is, the more stable it might be. Which, to be honest, it would support a historical Japan. Outside of that, Japan has a decent-sized army. Obviously, right now, it's reasonably bad. It's irregulars. You really need to get to line or skirmish to have a hope to hold off against anybody. If anybody has watched my warfare guide, you'll note as Great Britain, I easily stormed in and took one of Japan's islands at the beginning of the game. And if I wanted to, I could have probably taken all, if not most, of Japan in one war because Japan's army sucks at the beginning of the game. Now, that's not saying Japan isn't strong. Outside of great powers, Japan is really hard to beat. But Japan definitely wants to make an effort towards getting at least line infantry early on, especially if you think you're going to be attacked. Thankfully, most people leave Japan alone. The Europeans tend to go for China. Multiplayer, though, best of luck. I'm not going to get into strategies for that. Outside of that, Japan has a rather pathetic level of industry. It's not bad. I mean, they've got textiles, glassworks, paper mills, and they've got a good amount of plantations running. It's not great. It's not bad. Your industry is 10th in the world. It can easily grow much higher. Culturally, Japan has basically Japanese culture with a little bit of the Ainu, Han Chinese, and Micronesians in their nation. everybody's going to be of your Buddhist religion, so you're not going to have too much trouble with your culture or your religion. Shinto here is kind of interesting that they made Japan Buddhist. Shintoism is kind of the historical religion of it. Thankfully, it's not discriminated, but animist is, and so will eventually change. Animists are mainly up north with the Ainu population. Otherwise, the Ainus exist up here, Ainu Mosir. They are not part of your nation. They're a minor nation, meaning you can colonize them, which means getting a colonial law passed is pretty pressing. Now, we've already started reforming their army. You can do that, or you can try and push to colonial resettlement. In my opinion, you're probably going to want to do the colonizing as soon as you can. Oops, those guys actually are not in favor of colonizing. My bad. Intelligentsia probably are, though. Oh, no, I guess... you have to invent colonialism. That might be either after you've done mandatory service land infantry, might be worth doing that, or do colonialism first, then go for the military. You're unlikely to be attacked early, so this is probably what you're going to want to do. Colonialism, followed by the army. Once you do, you want to pass the law and immediately start colonizing this land up here. Why am I even talking about this? Well, Russia and Britain, pretty much. To some degree, France. Russia starts with colonizing the Kazakhs. They will very quickly colonize the Kazakhs, and then they will still be able to colonize more. If you look at Russia, what land borders Russia nearby that they could start colonizing without having to go to somewhere like Africa? Well, this area. Now, the problem is, once they complete this, they tend to immediately go into northern Japan. And if you're not moving quickly, it's quite possible to have Russia colonize the northern island of Japan, which means in order to regain your full homelands of Japan, even though these are owned by the Ainu and aren't really Japanese at this point in time, you've got to invade them. Beating Russia as Japan happened historically. The Russo-Japanese War was a surprising outcome where Japan won. In this game, that's kind of like a force recognition war with a retaking of land. It's not a bad thing to fight the war here because you can cut off their supply line and trap their troops, but it's much easier just to colonize this area and forget about it and then invade them elsewhere. So just be aware of that. Outside of all of this, and there's a lot of stuff to be done in Japan, you're stuck with traditionalism, which you want to change. Be aware, though, traditionalism here has your bureaucracy population cost multiplier is lower, meaning once you trade away from it, your bureaucracy costs are going to rise, and you have a decent amount of population. It's not going to be as bad as, say, China or even Russia, but it's still going to hurt, meaning you'll have to improve your government, especially if you want to improve your institutions. You start with law enforcement, which is kind of interesting, but you definitely want to get school and probably healthcare system going as soon as you can, which does require more investment into your government buildings. You also start with hereditary bureaucrats. Again, another population bureaucracy cost multiplier reducer. Once you change, again, you're going to see a huge jump in your bureaucracy. You're going to want to get rid of this because of the shogunate's landholders' political strength bonus, as well as allowing other stuff. You're going to want to get to either appointed or elected. It's really up to you which ones you like. I tend to go for appointed because it increases taxation. And since you have such a large population, you're not taxing very well. Now, it's almost impossible to actually get your taxation capacity high enough to handle these. You might be able to get like the Kyoto-Kanto region, the Kansai region here. You might be able to get one or two of them fully taxed. But most of your money doesn't come from tax, right? It comes from trade. Well, Japan, it doesn't. Now, it'll also come from wages, and that's where Japan starts to thrive. So let's talk about your economy. But before we hit on the economy, let's talk about what economic problems Japan has. So Japan has lots of natural resources. They've got coal, they've got sulfur, they've got lead, they've got iron, they've got wood, they've even got fishing wharves and other stuff. Now, You might be going, okay, so what's their problem? Well, first off, they have whaling stations, which gives them a little bit of oil, but they're missing some of the more... They're missing some late game resources that they need to go elsewhere to get their hands on. And while it's not the world's largest problem early on, it can quickly become one as the game progresses. So let's look at actual, not staple goods. Oh, maybe I can't easily sort to it. You're going to have access to a good portion of stuff, but you're not going to have everything. Sugar is something that you're only going to get through rice farms. You don't have any access to sugar plantations. You also don't have any access to opium, which is going to hurt your military later on. And in terms of resources, while you do have access to the major ones, you don't have the world's largest supply of these. Yes, you can build up your iron mines to 24, your coal to 72. That's great. You also have no access to oil, so you'd have to go elsewhere for that. By comparison, let's just jump over here, one of the largest mine areas. The Chinese can get 116 as well as 96 iron. You're never going to be able to match the Chinese resource generation in Japan, meaning if you want to really conquer lots of stuff and feed your war machine, you're going to have to invade other nations. And honestly, that's what Japan did historically. So you've got a great early and mid-game economy with a fall-off late game. You have no access to rubber unless you colonize Africa, which I recommend you do as Japan once you get your islands. Ignore Indonesia unless you really want some of this land. Instead, try and get South Cameroon or even down any of these that get you rubber, because you're going to need it. And in terms of oil, well, you're going to have to solve that problem to a large degree yourself. Sometimes oil is discovered, otherwise you have to invade it. China has access to oil. You get some oil from your whaling. It won't support your industry. You might need to invade Russia, the Middle East, to get oil, basically. And to be fair, that's kind of why Japan launched some of their wars, was to get access to oil and other stuff, and why the U.S. embargo on them caused so much trouble in World War II. So I said we were going to talk about the economy and building. We're going to take a detour into tech really quickly. So as I said, probably colonization followed by the military stuff. Afterwards, unless you're going to go to war, the last military tech you're going to need for a while is skirmish infantry, which is quite a ways away. So don't worry about it too much. Just slowly get your way to skirmish, then you can forget about it for ages. There's a huge 30-year, 40-year difference here. So once you hit skirmish, you're all set for quite a while. Ignore naval stuff. Even though you're an island nation, you will get some spread, and this usually is how you get naval tech. Your big focus should be production. Get cotton gin, get lathe here. That will just improve your base industries that much more. Focus on atmospheric engine, intensive agriculture, and the Bessemer process. The issue with Japan being isolationist, and it's why at some point you're going to want to change it, is that if you have a shortage of resource, you have no way to solve it except to build it yourself. Meaning, if you want to have an army capable of waging a war and conquering, say, China, like you're doing historically in Korea, you have to be able to support that industry internally, meaning you're going to need a lot of steel, you're going to need a lot of iron, a lot of coal, and a lot of tools, as well as a good portion of wood. Japan itself is interesting because they don't give you that many modifiers. You get an inland sea here, and outside of that, you have no terrain modifiers at this point. I assume they'll add them, considering how much the US and even China has. Japan not having really any feels kind of strange, but I guess that's just the way it goes. Meaning, you can build up, you can get a good industry going to support your army, but you need to make sure that you have your army supported, meaning subsidies may be necessary, as well as producing lots more barracks than you would expect just to support the arms industry. And you might even, for some time, not be able to reform from irregulars to line, because irregulars don't require any military equipment, but line requires small arms, then ammunition, then radios. You're not going to be able to do radios, let's be honest. Radios are going to be outside of your realm of capacity for a long time. So don't even think about that. Think about invading around the time you hit skirmish or even later. If you get to skirmish quickly and you do it efficiently, you can invade China. Now be aware China may have a defensive pact with Russia or something else, in which case you're going to have to back down. But if they don't, invading Korea and then China is quite possible, because China does not get away from irregulars for a long time. And if you go professional army, you can get to it a lot faster. Further on down Japan, just keep advancing production. I will make a certain note to the fact that central archives and identification documents do add to taxation capacity, which for Japan helps since you have taxation issues. If you can get to steel frame buildings, that can also help support your war machine, because then steel becomes useful. And there are several other events for Japan, and you know what? It'd probably be a good time to talk about that soon. Okay, I went for it a little bit to see if it would appear, but it didn't. So, actually it did. There we are. Honorable restoration. If the shogunate are not part of the government, this can fire. So let's remove the shogunate from our government. First off, the legitimacy totally disappears, but this is just to show you guys an example here. So if that happens, honorable restoration will start. What this means is the shogunate has to not be powerful for 10 years and not be part of the government. If so, you will trigger the Inari restoration, which will put the basically it'll put the emperor back in charge of Japan. Sort of like the Meiji restoration and stuff. And the reason that's important is because then that will trigger the ability to adopt Shintoism as your religion rather than Buddhism, which is why Shintoism's not the priority at this point. It's quite interesting because the Buddhist monks will lose Buddhism and they'll gain Shintoism, at which point they'll be renamed to Shinto monks rather instead. It's just kind of a cool little flavor event. Restoring the emperor and everything is all cool. Just be aware that if you pass too many laws, and you have to pass some to weaken the shogunate, if you remove them too soon, they will revolt and they will cause lots of trouble. I would not recommend trying to get rid of the monarchy as Japan until after you've solved all of that. It's just really not worth the hassle that comes from those problems. Sorry if my throat sounds a little harsh. I've been recording a lot. I think I'm getting a cold too. So anyway, moving on. Let's start talking about the industry. So if you've watched my other guides, then I recommend you do so. I've got a base industry, advanced trade, which is less important in Japan, and finally advanced in industry. And I'll cover some of it here, but I really do recommend you go read it. Or go watch it, rather. The priority for building your industry is going to be iron and coal and tools. So at the beginning, you've got a tool factory. I thought you had a tool factory. Am I crazy? I guess you don't have a tool factory. Build a tool factory. Try and figure out where you're going to want to focus your industries and stuff. So any province that has tons of iron and tons of coal, expect that to, like Kyushu here, is going to be coal. Now, you've got a massive amount of peasants, and the odds of you using them all up are slim, but it's possible. It's not like your China, which has multiple millions in every state. So this Kyushu down here is going to become your coal mining center. This area here is probably going to become your sulfur, maybe lead. Here, iron initially, although there are better iron mines elsewhere in your lands, like Kanto, as well as up here in Tohoku. I don't speak Japanese, as it's pretty obvious. Iron mines here is probably going to be where you build them, because this has got your best iron mine reserves. You're going to want to build to at least 21. That's for the throughput here. Build it up to 21, get the largest amount, then build it elsewhere up to 21, get the biggest bonus. Later on, you'll get economy of scale bonuses to 30, and then later on to like 15. So at which point you want to build those mines higher. What that basically means, they output more for the cost of output. So it doesn't increase the amount of input, but it does increase the amount of output type stuff. And it explains it if you hover over here. Effectiveness goes up. Less input, more output. As Japan, since you have to do it all yourself and you can't solve problems, centralization is a good thing. Just be aware, and this is a point I have to make because people forget it, once you start exceeding your infrastructure, you start to get shortages with goods and other problems, meaning railroads for Japan, Japan's known for its railroads, is very important. And electrical trains will help a ton with infrastructure problems. Prior to that, be careful of over-centralization. Thankfully, they are coastal and you get some bonuses. But it's quite possible to exceed this infrastructure, at which point you pretty much got to drop your other buildings and build railroads and stuff to solve the problem. Thankfully, early on, you have a ton of authority, so you can throw down plenty of road maintenance decrees here and still have stuff left over. If you want to run a Japanese ethno-state, definitely throw down promote national values in both Kyushu and Ainu, and that should convert the Chinese Ainu and I think it's Polynesians or whatever to your culture and religion. Once you restore Shintoism, you might want to do the same thing as well, in case you end up with other religions. Anyhow, let's talk about other stuff. So to start, you're going to want to build construction sectors. So figure out where you want to urbanize the most. And this might vary based off population stuff. So right now at the start of the game, I'm just double checking to make sure I'm right, Kyoto, Kansai region has the most population. This makes sense to be your most highly urbanized area, which means you want to build the construction sectors here before you build them anywhere else. Why? Because once you get later on, you get some bonuses towards construction stuff. The skyscraper in particular helps with all this. This is also probably where you're going to want to build your government center for similar reasons. And that's just a late game multiple that you're going to want to hit. So early on, you start with one. Make sure that you are using iron frame construction rather than wooden. Yes, it's going to cost you a good chunk of money early on, but it will help with your growth. Build one, maybe two if you want to put it on the edge. Each construction thing requires 21k income. You start within a large gold reserve, but it will go away. If you don't want to have a negative income, which some people absolutely are opposed to, it doesn't mean going into debt, just having a negative income for a while. Don't build the construction sectors. Instead, focus on building, and this applies after you build the construction sectors. So think about it that way. You're going to want to lower your construction goods. So take a look at where you're having problems. The odds are it's going to be iron, followed by wood, and then tools. Now, that's going to change a bit as we've changed the construction method. So if we look back at it, you'll see that iron has now skyrocketed. This means once we built the construction sectors, we want to start doing iron mines. So build a couple iron. Since we don't have any tool workshops that I've noticed, you're going to want to build a tool workshop. Now, you want to build it in a state that you're not going to necessarily get resources from. So right here, Chubu might be ideal. Lead mines are important for a while, but they're not the most important mine. They're probably the least important, sulfur being right nearby as well. So this is where you could build your tooling workshops. Again, remember, centralize it. So the more you build it up, the more efficient it will be, the cheaper it will help. You're going to need tons of iron, tons of coal, and tons of tool. That's your engine for growth. Build those up. Japan is so small. I would honestly recommend you go through and early on, unlike China or another great nation, and just finish off every single one of your resource buildings. Some people say, oh, centralize first. With Japan, since everything in your nation has to be so focused internally to grow, getting a base level of each of your resources going really helps, especially at any point if you wish to do automated construction, which you should be able to hit pretty quickly as Japan, since you're not selling things on a wider market. If you have a shortage, you address it. Then you don't have a shortage. This would allow you to then, when you automate all the buildings here, to build multiple at the same time. So if for some reason you ended up with a grain shortage, right? Having multiple rice farms and other stuff, the game will only auto-construct one level, really. So having multiple ones in multiple states can allow it to construct multiple ones. So multiple grain buildings, you might construct 5 rice farms rather than 1. Oh, there's still a shortage. We'll wait a while, then we'll construct a second one. Japan is probably one of those nations that you should run the economy solely by yourself, making it a good challenge for people who want to get better at micromanaging. For those of you who don't, definitely build all the resources, put on auto construction, still maintain a steady construction of iron, coal, and tools at the beginning, then add in steel, then add in sulfur and lead, depending if you go for paper or for enhanced glass work first. Glass uses lead, paper uses more sulfur. The odds are you'll probably go paper because you're going to need paper to help with your bureaucracy bonuses. And to grow your bureaucracy for your government buildings, which you should do. The best way to grow as Japan is to try and get a great technology base going quickly, something Japan does decently well. You've got good literacy, but you're nowhere near your innovation cap. Getting the schools changed to at least religious, ideally public or private, that would help the most. Religious is good enough at the start. Trying to build up that institution as high as you can get it may require you to go and grab I can never say that. That one, as well as dialectics here to get higher level of education investments. Build that up. Definitely build a university, probably again in a state that you're not going to get tons of natural resources from. Kanto is a decent location. Get a university, get up to 21, get the most throughput. Do that a couple places. You want to educate your populace. Don't neglect putting a single university in every state, even though it does help to centralize them for the innovation. Spreading them out will help educate your population as well as increase the qualifications of the local populace so they can work in factories sooner. Qualifications can be one of the slower roadblocks for Japan, but more importantly, the general literacy increases how much innovation you can get. Research the tech. If you can start to get a tech lead or catch up to people like Britain, the US, France, you should be able to wreck China. And it makes sense to go for China, for Japan, because they have similar religion. Now, their culture is discriminated against, but as Japan, if you change your laws here from national supremacy, even down to racial segregation or ideally cultural exclusion, you will be able to, especially if you don't convert the population down here, which has some Han Chinese in it, you will be able to take over their lands and actually integrate them into your lands at a reasonable pace. You'll have problems with European populations because they don't share Eastern or other culture traits. We could look at that, actually, now that I'm pointing that out. So they're Yamato, which is Japanese, but also East Asian. Here's all the other East Asian ones. As soon as you become tolerant of the other East Asian cultures, it makes sense to expand into East Asian regions. If you go full tolerance, then you could do weird stuff like invade the United States and be tolerant. But at that point, you're going to also want to make your religion more open. Buddhism is more tolerated. That's the reality. Anyway, that's pretty much it. The goal for Japan, by and large, early on is to invade Korea, and you'll get various, I think you get at least 2 events. I can't remember. It's been a while since I did a full run as Japan. I've done a couple starting and one full one. Invading Japan, conquering that area is good. You might get it when you restore the, I can't remember, the honorable restoration stuff. You want to conquer Korea first, usually. Korea is pretty easy to take, and it's got decent resources that you might need. as well as further on. A big prize to take from China is Outer Manchuria, which will develop gold mines. Once you take that, it really cripples the Chinese government, who rely really heavily on those gold mines to stay positive early on. Take Beijing, take Hebei, take Shanxi here, and China's doomed. They will collapse. If you win a couple wars, you'll trigger the Chinese fragile unity collapse, and they'll just be like 5 or 6 Chinese nations on your borders that you can conquer. It's easy. It's fun. It's really not as hard as it should be. I think they will rework it, as well as give you more in the future journal entries / missions to invade and conquer China. Maybe even stuff like to set up, if China overthrows their emperor, the ability to set it up as a puppet government in Manchuria, which would be a cool historical thing and rather accurate. Although they do have to make it so that populations die off at a reasonable rate rather than living to, I think I got this guy to 160 or almost 160. He lived the whole game in my game. It was weird. Anyway, that will be it for the guide. I could keep going on, but I've covered most everything. I don't want to tell you exactly what to build everywhere. Construction, iron, tools, coal. At some point, you're going to develop everything in Japan and become very well aware that only by conquering other nations will you truly be able to hit the full potential. It's very easy to dominate the world economically as these guys. Just at some point, reform your trade laws. It doesn't mean you have to trade with people, but it does allow you to solve any shortages, which helps a lot. The sooner you can solve shortages, the sooner your economy will just boom. Once you start booming, you'll know, because your GDP graph will pretty much be straight up for a while. And you'll get a lot of that by reforming your laws and getting new tech. Anyhow, one other thing to watch out for, though, and I should mention this, is don't join a custom union, and definitely don't get into a custom union with China. They have so many more resources and stuff that it can easily crash your economy if you're not careful. Especially once people can start to sell goods in your lands by changing your trade law. Somebody who has cheap goods could easily rush in and wipe out your industry. Isolationism is good. Make sure that you're ready before you leave it, which can take a lot of work. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you liked it, like, comment, subscribe. Hope to see you in another guide or Let's Play. Thank you again for watching. I do appreciate it. Bye for now.